Good afternoon, everyone, and good morning. Andrew, who's joining us from the US. Uh, Welcome, everybody, to this webinar with Hyperscience and TechUK on AI and the future of work. Really pleased that everyone can join us today. My name is Heather Kovakus, and I'm head of the Central Government Program at TechUK. And just a few housekeeping things before we kick off. So on this webinar, we encourage you to get involved, ask your questions, and there's a Q&A function. If you just drop those questions that you have in the chat, that would be really helpful, and we'll get to them towards the end of the session today. We expect to have a conversation for about 30 minutes, 35 minutes or so, and then get to some of your questions and sort of bring you guys into the discussion. So please feel free to engage and to drop those questions in the chat. Um, so just to sort of kick things off and do a bit of scene setting, we know that AI is everywhere we turn. I've already been to one roundtable on AI this morning, and really pleased to continue the conversation this afternoon with you here today. And it's affecting everything from sort of the way that we learn in school to the way that we work and conduct our work. So really pleased to sort of get into some of the background about that and to understand what impact that might have and how things how the world of work is going to look going forward. Pleased to be joined by Andrew Joyner from Hyperscience and Jay Bangle from TPXimpact. And I'm going to give them a few minutes to introduce themselves, starting with Andrew.
Well, thanks for having me. My name is Andrew Joyner. I'm the CEO of Hyperscience. I'm actually joining you from Washington, D.C. We're about to attend an event with one of our partners, IBM, here in the public sector. I joined Hyperscience a little over 2 years ago. Hyperscience was founded 14 years ago, really in the machine learning space, really to fundamentally try to use document automation, AI to apply to document automation to streamline processes. And obviously that has a big impact in what we do in government. Just pleased to be here, and thank you for having me.
Great. Jay.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for having me as well. I'm joining you from Surrey, so not as glamorous as Washington. I'm the Chief Technology Innovation Officer at TPXimpact. So I lead on all of our tech, data, and AI across our work with organizations in public and private sector. My focus is on making AI practical, helping organizations use it safely, responsibly, and with actual and real impact. Prior to this, I was in the civil service. I was the CTO in His Majesty's Courts and Tribunal Service, helping to modernize and improve access to justice.
Amazing. That sounds great. I like practical AI personally myself. It's all great to go to the big conferences where you see like the robot dog and like the and those kinds of things. But for me, I think my background is in international development, and I'm passionate about the way that technology can be used to improve public services and access and make our lives as citizens better. So yes, the robot dog is fun, but I want to see some real impactful AI and technology more generally. So turning to our topic today, which is around sort of AI and the future of work. How do you envision AI transforming the future of work in the UK public sector, particularly in terms of employee engagement and job satisfaction? Andrew, do you want to start us off?
I'll kick us off, and then hopefully Jay, you'll weigh in and correct me wherever I went wrong. The vision of Hyperscience. Look, we raised $300 million from preeminent VCs across the world to chase and essentially provide a foundation to solve this problem. We've seen a lot of applications of AI, and we're getting familiar with it today. And most of our lens at which we look at AI is through a generative lens. But actually, there's a whole spectrum of practical technologies. And what Hyperscience built was essentially the ability to read human-friendly information, to do it at a scale, whether it's visually complex or linguistically complex. And you say, why would you raise all this money to do such a simple? Actually, it's a very hard machine learning problem. Humans are quite good at assimilating visual information, very, very quickly. And when you're doing things in the government services, such as intaking information, whether it's medical information, whether it's some type of benefit information that you need to use, usually the intake is a human readable format. It's a form. You might attach identity documents to verify who you are. And as soon as you start down that process, you start a cognitive load into the government where they've got to process this information. And that's at our scale, government serving the entire citizenry. It gets to be quite a human scale problem. And so services slow down. And so what we have is the promise of a hyperscience by using this novel technology to solve something like that seems simple, but is actually quite complex. Once you can achieve the reading of documents, you can start to speed up the extraction of information and then the provision of those benefits. And so what we're seeing in our use cases is where you used to apply for benefits, it would take months, like at the HMRC. Now, you can do it in a matter of days. Employees don't have to spend the laborious time keying information, correcting information that was extracted incorrectly. And so this just represents the very beginning, I think, of the promise of using this technology in novel ways to provide better services.
Great. Jay?
Yeah, I mean, we've spent a lot of time in government making the user experience excellent. If you imagine where we were before, services that used to be a black hole, paper processes, they're far more accessible, far more transparent, and much, much faster. But it's rare that the digital transformation is end to end. So the internal users, the staff, maybe don't have the same great experience. There's either lots of edge cases or there's entire parts of the process which fall out to sort of manual processing. So perhaps it's processing thousands of inbound unstructured user queries via email probably, or it's, as Andrew said, processing paper applications from digitally excluded people, or updating that critical spreadsheet that's shared with another team, or sending off emails between government departments. All of that is what we're talking about here, and all of that is the hard, repetitive, and manual work. And it's work that has to be right every single time. Failure cannot happen, especially when you're in a really complex citizen-facing service. And it slows down the journey for the user at the end of the day. But as you say, it impacts job satisfaction. And it's easier than it's ever been today. Obviously, there's products like Hyperscience that help us, automate a huge amount of stuff we could before. And that's really what we're trying to take advantage of with this new wave of technology that's now in our hands. But we need to do it all with care, right? I think we've seen so much talk of AI and its promise, and a lot of kind of bad practice as well. So it's all about making sure it's careful, responsible, and we treat AI as a co-pilot. It's helping us do our jobs more effectively, but it's taking away some of the stuff that we really shouldn't be doing at all. And we need to make sure that our public services remain in the hands of us humans.
Yeah, that's a really good point. I think your point around sort of the experience, not just for the citizen, but the actual civil servant or public sector worker that's engaging with it is important too. So given the high percentage of workers that who feel sort of disengaged from their roles, what specific AI applications do you think could make government work more rewarding and impactful?
So Jay, do you want me to take this first?
You like?
Yeah, of course. One of the things that I think is going to happen in AI that I think is underappreciated. I joined Hyperscience over 2 years ago. Really in the last 18 months. Prior to that, we didn't really talk about AI as our application, right? It seemed a little bit science fiction-y at the time, and now I think if you just look back, it's only been 18 months. I think the pace of change is coming very, very quickly. We've been able to experience parts of it, and we can see how in areas of creativity, in areas of routine tasks, it can make it simpler by writing emails or generating content for us. I think that what we're going to see is potentially an ability to draw a circle around processes that we do today, and not just optimize them a little bit more, but completely reimagine how we do that process. And that's it's a creative experiment to think about. No longer do I have to kind of go down the supply chain of the way of doing things, right? Tools that speed up potentially the way I type something in, or the way I send something on, to actually think about re-engineering the process end to end. and you get more of an elevated view of how you do things. And I think that that's what we have seen even in the last 18 months in the practical application of AI, is that at first people go at this as a new tool. Here's a new tool that, can help me do a task. And then you start to zoom out now, and you start to think about, actually, we could do this task, or actually this entire process, completely differently. The immigration services in the US now is looking at our H-1B process as an example, and that's a long, lengthy visa process. It takes, our backlog in the US for this value is for knowledge workers who come in for jobs that we can't fill in the US. They're about 100,000 a year. That process is backlogged over 2 years. So applicants, a very frustrating experience for applicants. They have to submit their applications more than 6 times. That's frustrating for people who are going through deduping information, reattaching their credentials, reattaching their job histories, reattaching their education credentials, and that continues to bottleneck in the government. We're going to solve it in a few days once we can get through. We're not going to solve it in a few days, but we'll get the process down and the adjudication of the immigration process to a few days. And I think that's freeing for like an immigration officer, as an example, who has had to spend time processing for education credentials and maybe markets they're not familiar with. And now here's an example of a tool that could help them understand grading systems in schools and so forth. So I think as we reimagine these processes, it's a whole creative freedom. I think it's much more efficient. And I think in many ways, you can help the constituents on the other end in novel and new ways.
Yeah, I totally agree with all of that. And there's been perennial issues that we've faced forever. Things like accessing knowledge. We have really complex processes. If you take Andrew's example of that immigration process, it's like the people processing those things have to remember everything. They've got to remember the legal frameworks, the completely, probably thousands of different processes they need to follow. If you talk about the educational requirements for that immigrant, for example, and accessing that knowledge is really tough. Every organization faces it. We've tried to solve this with so many different ways. But the new breed of technology now with AI, it gives us a new opportunity to try this. And this really is where I think the most value comes from this new technology. So we're able to enable people like caseworkers to access the right information at the right point, which ensures they're faster, they're more productive, they're less frustrated, but also the process is more compliant. Because if someone makes a mistake because they've not got the right information, that can have serious consequences. It could also frustrate the end user, as Andrew said, processing things 6 or 7 times because of mistakes on someone's party. But actually, we can make sure this is done once all the way through. We've mentioned a lot kind of intelligent document processing, this idea of we can take in those forms, claims, applications, and process them without human intervention or with very little human intervention. But we've also got, as Andrew said, the more creative element, helping to write reports or policy drafting, service design, things where actually having an AI working alongside you can be much, much faster, and focus on, the more higher cognitive elements of your role. We can also look at AI for prioritizing the work and making sure we're adding the most value, or predictive analytics or enhancing data accessibility. There's tons of applications that we can apply AI to in order to help all of us work smarter, and make our jobs more enjoyable at the same time. One of the great examples I like to talk about when it comes to AI applications is this idea of an AI caseworker copilot. It's on the more extreme end of the complexity, but actually, so much of what we do in public sector is casework, is processing people's claims or inquiries, and actually having an AI working alongside you as a caseworker, helping to make sure you do all the tasks you need to. It's giving you real-time suggestions, automating steps you don't need to take yourself. That's really where we need to head, to make sure that we're giving a much more enriched experience, not only for the end user, but also for the person processing the work.
Yeah, I think those are really some key points. I think particularly this idea of giving you an elevated view of the work. So when you're not necessarily bogged down in like ticking this box and is this paper filed in the correct place, you're able to sort of take a step back and say, this is the value that I bring. This is the importance of the work that I'm doing, rather than just like, just repetitive sort of those tasks that seem endless and thankless. You can sort of begin to view your role from a sort of a different point of view to say, actually, but I'm not like bogged down in doing that because the AI is helping me to do that more efficiently. I can really start to say what can I bring it, what value can I add to it, and I think that's really exciting. I think, and that's fulfilling really for people in that work. So the UK government is increasing its spend on AI and data-driven public services. How can public sector organizations effectively leverage this kind of investment to enhance service delivery to citizens? How are citizens going to feel this at the end of the day?
Do you want me to
Well, at
go
the end of
first,
the
Andrew? Oh, yeah.
yeah, I think
Go
at the
ahead.
end of the day, people want an efficient, effective government, right? But there are competing objectives that happen with AI. So efficient and effectiveness could come through more automation, as an example. But automation can come at the expense of, for instance, the accuracy of your information. And so to deliver things to the citizenry that you want in an effective way, you've got to process this information accurately. So we've done it with humans, right? Humans are very accurate. They can process the information, and so you get the benefits and so forth that you deserve. But to deliver automation sometimes should come at the compromise of that, right? So you have all these exception handling that you use to handle it. The promise of AI is to balance both of those objectives, right? So now you have a single person who can enable high rates of automation and supervise the computer doing these menial tasks at high rates of accuracy. And so you get essentially higher levels of service much more efficiently and effectively. And in the government, you just need to provide the service. I think at the end of the day, we have to make sure the services are provided at whatever cost, but doing it much more efficiently and effectively is why I think there's so much promise for us to deliver and use AI in the public sector. The public sector, to me, might actually lead the way in this. In the commercial sectors, I still think we're looking at optimizing it to the best cost. And I think the lens that we have in the public sector is deliver this effectively and efficiently. And if it's the right tool for the job, then let's apply the right tool for the job. And I think AI is going to be proven to be the absolute right tool for a lot of the underpinning of these services. Because a lot of the services that we have to provide in the public sector are back office type things that are related. It's the processing of information for benefits and so forth, or tax-paying purposes. And so I think that there's just going to be a reinvention of how we drive automation for public sector. And I think at the end of the day, we're all going to get tremendous benefit. I think our services are going to happen much more quickly. The less service calls in that will occur because things are happening more accurately. There's not mistakes, as many mistakes that are being made. And so I think that we're going to experience a little bit of a renaissance if we apply these tools and so forth in the right fashion.
Okay.
I mean, yeah, Heather, you mentioned, the increasing spending on AI from the UK government. I think, the level of commitment is vast. There's, new announcements on AI, almost every week at this point. And departments and all the public sector need to find a way of leveraging that, as you said. And my advice would be to try to start. It's tempting to start simple. It's tempting to go for something really small and simple, but actually with this topic, you need buy-in from the beginning. It's really important that people see real impact because there's been a lot of stuff oversold on this topic. So we need to focus really, really clearly on use cases that align with the strategic objectives and citizen value. Use cases that people can instinctively understand. Andrew mentioned some of those. But we need to still make sure we stay agile. But it has to be on big problems. There's this, as I said, it's tempting to do sort of agile on small things, but we need to do agile on big problems, but make sure we're being innovative all the way. We need to build AI fluency across every organization, every level, not just technical AI fluency, but policy and ethical understanding. And we need to partner with vendors who are able to explain their products, who are able to work responsibly and accountably. And just like any digital transformation, we need to embed that continuous feedback at every single level, all the way up to ministerial, all the way up to local government leadership, and make sure that everyone is able to feed in and understand what's going on. And we don't need to start from scratch. There's been so much work already done. There's so many people who are leading the way. GDS, for example, have a new AI playbook out. There's a ton of material that people can be using to try to start the AI journey and take advantage of the political will and the investment that's being made in this topic.
So you said not to start small, but to go for the big things. Like what big thing, if they were to do one big thing, what would you think it could be, Jay?
So I would try and find these, if we take like a government department that's operationally focused, I would try and find the service that has the biggest backlog. Try and, organizations probably know why they've got a backlog. It might be that it's just really complex. So the cases they're dealing with are hyper complex. So find out what the reasons that the caseworkers are struggling or whatever it might be. It could be knowledge base. Go after that. But approach it still in that kind of very agile, very innovative, very kind of like spirit of invention, as opposed to trying to tackle this big problem with a big program. That's not going to work. Yeah.
Jay, I think you're exactly right. I think Jay's title is a CTO. And as I look at the implementation of AI, that lens, the CTO lens that can look at potentially the process from end to end and the impact it has, versus more of an operations or more of a classic CIO mentality, which is how do I deliver my services more efficiently, more cost effectively? What I've seen in the advent of in the use of AI is the lens from the CTO, I believe, is the right lens today to reimagine how these services take on a big problem. There's an article that's being circulated around many of the AI circles on the horseless carriages. It's sort of the idea that once you remove the horses, you tried to just use the existing vehicle, right, and put an engine behind it, and obviously that vehicle wasn't built. Sometimes just trying to use these brand new tools to optimize an existing way of doing things is the wrong lens. And I think that's why Jay and I connected so much as we thought about the public sector, which is take on something big, draw a circle around the process. Don't just try to potentially use this very powerful new capability against old ways of doing certain tasks and processes. You can reimagine them. And that's what we've seen at Hyperscience in many ways is the way that we processed claims for the Veteran Affairs used to take 3 months. We now process 1 billion documents more fluently, and the process is down to 3 days. And the benefit is the patient experience, the veteran experience. They used to think it was broken. It was one of the worst NPS scores in our government, but now it's actually a very positive experience that they have. And we just were able to reimagine the process with the use of AI.
Yeah, I mean, that's really exciting. And I think, AI is a tool, but it sort of works within a system. And sometimes you need to reimagine the whole system to get the best out of the tool, right? So, yeah, no, that's really exciting. So,
And Heather, sorry, just to build on that point, AI isn't always the answer, which I know is a sort of silly thing to say on this call, but it isn't. And we need to be honest with ourselves and make sure we're applying the right solution to the problem. And AI holds great promise and it's already delivering great value, but we need to not just apply it for applying its sake. So yeah, being really honest with ourselves and making sure we're using it responsibly would be the thing to do.
Yeah, that reminds me. So in the government's AI opportunity and action plan that they published in January, one of the things that they committed to do in the response to that was to have an AI champion in each, I think it was either in each sort of mission board for mission-led government or in each department. I can't remember which. But I think that's the wrong approach. I think it's more you need an innovation champion and not necessarily an AI champion, because I think sometimes you need to be more open to innovation as opposed to just how can I use AI, because AI might not be the right tool to use. It might be, but maybe it's how can we reimagine this? How can we think about this differently? How can we provide a better service and not how can we use AI? I think that's sort of the wrong starting point if you start there.
Well, and part of the problem is, we just participated in Google Cloud as an example, as one of their strategic partners. And if you walked around a trade room floor, it's very hard to distinguish what is AI anymore. Every vendor, every sign, and so it's washed, right, as it's just an enabling tool. Yeah. And so to Jay's point, you really have to understand what is being applied to what task, to what process. And sometimes it's just a poorly designed process, and just good process engineering can actually help solve the task. So I think we are going to go through a period of disillusionment where you think it is the end promise, and whatever you may choose, maybe just be an added feature that's been marketed as
Yeah.
AI. And so I think we have to go through a little bit of that information and boundaries of understanding what actually is being applied when.
Yeah, yeah. I think everyone's going to go through that learning curve and become a more intelligent buyer and a more intelligent supplier once we sort of figure out where those boundaries lie. So, as public sector organizations consider embracing AI on a larger scale, what are some of the key benefits that they should prioritize, but also some of those risks that they should be aware of as well? You want to start us
Jay, why
off,
don't you
Jay?
start this one?
Yeah, sure. So I think I would say in terms of like key benefits to prioritize, the first one would be all about the citizen experience. So faster, better, deeper experiences. That can then translate into a better experience to the people processing that work. We need to focus on places where we can scale support for overburdened teams. You know, that burnout is bad and it's everywhere, and it can really affect, you know, people's mental health, but also the productivity of the organization. So making sure that any investment, any focus is on those types of areas. We need to look at kind of predictive insight as well into needs to try to get ahead of the next demand that might come to us, to do early intervention where we can. And AI is used already extensively in this area, if you take in health, for example. And we need to enhance transparency through data-driven insights. So we have a ton of data available to us, but it's not really accessible. It's not accessible to the right people to make the right decision at the right point. So I think, you know, another key benefit, another area where AI can really help is making sure that we are making decisions transparently with all the data available to us. I think in terms of risks, you know, in everyday life, we have, you know, bias and discrimination, and that exists in our data and therefore exists in tooling. We need to be aware of that. We need to test for that. We need to be constantly vigilant for it, and we need to be honest with ourselves about it. And the other risks of kind of, you know, doing too much AI or doing AI in the wrong way is a loss of public trust. Certainly if we're not being transparent. The other kind of risk in this area is workforce resistance, fear of job losses, and we need to be really transparent and co-design with those people to try to eliminate that. And we've mentioned it already, but kind of like poor procurement, poor vendors, vendor lock-in, kind of overselling, you know, that's kind of a risk in this space as well.
Andrew, you want to add anything?
Yeah, you know, I would build on it really from the provider perspective, since Hyperscience is an AI provider to the space. What I look at, I would echo what Jay said. What I look at is where there's citizenry impact. That typically is going to be services at scale, a lot of touch points, a lot of information that's being exchanged. And wherever you see a touch point of that exchange of information is a friction point, typically in the government, and the efficacy of those services. And so now you have these types of tools that can eliminate the friction points. They do come with complexity. You know, when you're using AI, what trained it, right, to understand the information that you're processing? Do you have transparency into how it's, you know, being used and trained? There are a lot of new things that we haven't had to process as, you know, buyers in the public sector that now we have to be cognizant of, and that can slow things down. But I think Jay's point at the end of the day is, yes, there are AI providers that handle sovereignty of data, that provide transparency in an ethical way. You can apply them to scale. Now, these services can be delivered at scale, and you want to apply them in the areas where there's maximum friction points. And I think, again, I would zoom out and think about not necessarily augmenting the way we're doing tasks today. I would go ahead and reimagine what the processes could look like. I think our capacity, the technology is there, so our capacity to actually leverage this technology is really guarded or burdened or governed by management's ability to understand the change. I think it's more the people element. that we're going to run into than it will be the actual limitations on the technology. I think it's the investment is so vast in the marketplace. I'm seeing companies that I talked to a year ago advance tremendously quickly, and now we have tools helping us write code. So I think the technology is advancing so quickly. I would lean in, and I think that at the end of the day, the governor will be: can we actually understand the change as managers and leaders? More so than the technology.
Yeah. I wonder, sort of picking up a little bit on what I'm considering to be the elephant in the room, for me at least, is around sort of people feeling like AI is going to take their jobs. Is there, what can we do to sort of reassure people, or what is that false to try to
Maybe
reassure
just
people?
acknowledge we had a good run, right? Didn't we all have a good run? I think that, yeah, that was, you know, look, I think with any enabling technology, you learn new sets of skills. And so I think
Yeah,
this is, a new and enabling technology. And I think it's what's our duty is to embrace it. It's coming and it's effective and it's being proved. And so I think our task are, you look at children in schools are using these technologies. At first,
yeah,
that people were somewhat abrasive at using it to help them write term papers and things like that. And I think now we're just learning that these tools are here, that they're staying, not going anywhere, and they will be improving. And so I think, like, I'm looking at it just like with any enabling technology. I think it will change fundamentally, no doubt about it. I think it's going to be profound in the types of tasks that we do. I think we just have to acknowledge it. But I think embracing it, I think we'll just adapt to the next higher level of order of things we're able to do with this new technology. At least that's my view, Jay. I don't know if you agree or
No, I
disagree.
completely agree. It's, it is a valid concern, and people should think about it. And I think we've seen it through the government positioning on AI with the need to upskill. Training is really important, not only so that people can adopt this technology into their daily lives in a way that's really productive and safe, but also, if jobs are displaced, that they can be redeployed. And ultimately, until we have less demand than we have people for, we're going to have those jobs. We just need to make sure that people are able to be redeployed really successfully. And I think in the short term, we will see not jobs being displaced, but tasks being displaced. AI will enhance those jobs. We will have a problem though in the longer term, and this is what we need to be asking our politicians and other thinkers to be thinking about as a society, what this means for us. But as we move from the kind of short to medium term, these things are all about upskilling and using AI to, as Andrew said, reimagine our work and help it enhance our jobs.
yeah.
Yeah,
No,
as a CEO of a business, where I find optimizations or processes that I can redo with AI, I actually take those dollars, I'm actually redeploying them into the business, whether it's behind just different initiatives in our business, whether it is in engineering, as an example, or ML research or other areas. And so I think most leaders would think like me today, which is, the envelope of money may shift. Like Jay said, there may be a task that I can now use, an enabling tool like AI to solve. But ultimately, I want to get even more efficient, more effective as a business. And so I redeploy those dollars. And I think Jay's point is exactly right. Upscaling will be what we do, and we will be looking at new opportunities and new ways with these new upskills to be more effective and find a competitive advantage.
yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. I had actually this conversation with my parents over Christmas about AI taking people's jobs, and I kind of look at it like, 100 years ago, 150 years ago, people's jobs were to sort of like make matchstick. Like nobody does that anymore. But like 50 years ago, no, like YouTube influencer was not a job that existed. So there,
Yes.
and it's a job now. So there are jobs that come and jobs that go, and but people always find a way to make it through. And so yes, there might be some tasks that are now completely done by AI, or whole jobs that are replaced by AI, but there will be things that are coming up that we don't even know about now that people will, start to use to employ their time and to make money. So I think it's not all gloom and doom as some people might fear. I just want to encourage people to do put any questions that they have or comments in the chat, and we'll get to that. in maybe about 10 minutes time, so please do engage. Um, Moving on to my next question here. So how can public sector employees be engaged in the AI adoption process to ensure that they feel valued and a part of the transformation so that they don't feel sort of left behind and a bit too scared? But how can we give them that reassurance? Or how do we involve them effectively?
Yeah, Jay.
Yeah, so I think the most important thing is clear communication on purpose, impact, boundaries of AI. It can't be spurious and vague mentions of AI as the golden bullet for everything, but really, really specific and surgical. People need to understand why and need to understand how. So it needs to be hyper specific and really transparent. But we need not reinvent the wheel here when it comes to transforming an organization. We've been doing it for a long time. AI is, yes, it's another tool, but we need to take all of the ways we've been doing this well, and use AI in that space. But I think co-design is the biggest enabler. We need to bring teams, frontline teams, service teams into the conversation from the very beginning. And that will then help us understand what we need to reskill or upskill people in order to take advantage of that technology in the best way. And we need to reward and recognize people who are, leading the way, who are being innovative. And to your point, Heather, that kind of innovation champion kind of idea needs to be threaded all the way through the organization. So people are worried about it. They'll hear about AI. They'll worry about their role. And the way we can combat that is, as I say, just be really transparent, really clear, and bring people into the conversation. We can't do AI to them. It needs to be done collaboratively.
Yeah, Jay, that was perfectly said. And if I were just to echo one point, to the individuals, what I recommend and what I'm pushing inside of our own business at Hyperscience is to prioritize training and learning. You have to make the effort. Things are changing almost overnight. And an example in a Hyperscience business, maybe it's not as relevant in public sector, but it's a good anecdote. 75% of queries now, when you search for information on the web, are solved by an AI agent, right? It gives you the information you're looking for versus linking to content that you go and you click upon. That's a profound change in the way we actually monetize content across, B2B companies. Part of what my largest spend in marketing used to be is buying keywords and trying to find people who are searching for AI-enabled technologies and document processing automation, and that's changed. The role, though, used to be you would sit at a Google AdWords and essentially guess at what things people were going to be looking for to find your products and services. That's now being solved in a different way. We've got to prioritize now learning about what's the new way to find people on the web, right? How do we influence the agents that are summarizing this information so that we rank still and people still want to find leaders in the space that we provide? And so teams should be researching that new initiative. And so it's just an example of something that is the way we've been doing things in the web for the past 20 years has just fundamentally changed, and literally almost overnight. You have to prioritize training and thinking. You're going to have to, as an individual, really start thinking about these things more deeply and understand these technologies, because I think the opportunity on the other side, whoever figures this out, is going to be, it's going to be open up a lot of opportunity.
We're getting some really good discussion in the chat and the Q&A. But one thing that I always sort of wrestle with, and I'll take this last couple of minutes in my chair role to ask the question that's on my mind, is around sort of when we talk about upskilling, particularly in public sector. I always wonder, does it need to be that people need to upskill themselves, or does the tech just need to be easier to use? Because a new cell phone comes out, a new mobile phone, and no one's going to lessons to learn how to use that phone, right? It just feels intuitive, and you kind of just work your way through and know, and next thing you know, you're it's all at your fingertips, and there's no sort of class you go to learn how to use the phone. And so I always think about that when I think about people talking about upskilling to engage with AI. And it's kind of like AI should be human centric is the term people before it used to be human in the loop, which is still important, but I think human centric sort of adds this thing of the AI should cater to you and not you catering to the AI. And so that's what I think about when I think about skills and how we sort of link the two. And maybe I've just gone on a tangent and you guys are like, Heather,
No.
bring it back. But any thoughts on that?
Yeah, look, I love that. I love Jay's perspective. Like I think about Salesforce as a core application, as an example. And with AI technologies, you no longer have to interact with Salesforce in the way that you used to, right? Understanding how to apply filters and filter down pipeline information. You're able to have a conversation with the data, right? I'm just looking at our forecast and how our happy customers, sad customers. So interface design, that requirement is not going away. It's just you're now interacting in a completely novel and new way. Whereas how we used to interact with applications through buttons and clicks and things that you would learn a skill for, that's just changed. But ultimately, we now need new interfaces to interact with information. And so we think about that a lot at Hyperscience, right? With having now certain tasks and key tasks that are taken care of. But what are the new interface designs, right, that are now going to be used and paradigms used going forward, which is a little bit what that horseless carriage example is talking about. And so I think your point is exactly right, Heather, which is, the applications need to work better for us, but the actual skills and so forth themselves haven't necessarily will not change over time.
Right.
Just to add to that, I think if we go back to the last big technological shift, basically the internet, think Google, it took people a long time for it to become muscle memory. You had a question, we would just Google it, right? But it took you a long time to work that out. There's people still, generations older who don't have that muscle memory, who don't immediately pick up Google and ask the question. And I think that's what we need to get people to learn, is that instinctive way of interacting with AI. If you've been using ChatGPT for the last 2 years, you probably already have it, but a lot of people haven't. And it's that way of interacting with language, as opposed to what Andrew said, which is like clicking buttons, creating filters. Actually, just express myself. But expressing yourself in a way that is going to be successful. That's what we need to teach people. And by teaching people that, we can then open up more opportunities. So I think it really is all about muscle memory. And it's about saying, before you would have had to go through this complex thing of creating a pivot table in Excel and creating a formula and having to remember all of that and using Google. And now you can just ask the question. And it's a shift, right? Because we are so used to working in a certain way, and it's going to take people a while because people are naturally, change is difficult for all of us. It's going to take people a while to kind of, rewire their brains into this new way of working, which is much more conversational as opposed to clicking screens.
That makes perfect sense. I'm going to get to some of the questions that we have in the chat and in the Q&A. I'll start with the Q&A. What tools do you think have longevity in the market and are getting the most uptake in licenses, etc.? Are there any sort of standouts that you guys are like, yeah, this is the thing that is going to save us all?
So you want to start?
Yeah. So I think I would talk more about models to begin with. So underpinning every single AI product is some really great AI models. And if we talk about the big ones from like OpenAI and Google and Meta, and custom ones like what Hyperscience are building for their own product, they are the magic. They're then wrapped in various different ways. And what we tend to see is organizations building those products to wrap those models in different ways, and they come and go. But the model underneath is where the power is, and it's all about applying that model in a way to fix a specific problem. Hyperscience have done it for what their product does, and others are working on other techniques. But we need to also take those models and deploy them internally to our internal problems. There might be a really custom bespoke thing, like if we take something in the NHS, for example, we want to deploy one of those models too. So I think those models will have longevity. The tools around them will have longevity as long as they're useful, and as long as they're adding something to the conversation.
Yeah, I think Jay nailed it. The models are what is key. What I see the mistake that a lot of organizations are thinking, though, is that the models are so powerful and easy to access that you can easily also build an application around it. And I look back to when the web was first invented and portals became a big thing, and every business went on the software journey of building internal portals for accessing information, and that world sort of gotten eaten. I think in this day and age, AI is going to advance so quickly that I would hesitate to try to take any projects or tools that you think you're going to build upon and try to leverage things that are existing. Applications that help you manage, people forget that the lifecycle management of models is quite complex. Your data is constantly changing and so forth. So there's layers of tools of complexity to roll this out that I would hesitate anyone going on their own build journey today at the pace of which the technology is being rolled out by a lot of the large or specialized vendors like Hyperscience, or at a larger scale, like you said, Meta or Microsoft.
There are two questions in the chat that I'm sort of going to combine into one. So the first one is from Alistair Chiefra. He asks, what thinking has there been done around the increased attack surface that implementation of these tools will lead to? Example, data poisoning of AI models. And then Lauren Birch also asked about what approaches you would recommend to build trust, particularly in public sector. So it's sort of like this increased risk, but then how do you build trust?
Yeah, such a good question. Look, we at Hyperscience, we think about this every day. So the way we designed our system is to make sure you have sovereignty and control and access and transparency into the data that goes into the model. And you need to be able to make sure you can trace the lineage, throughout the versions, because it is untraceable when the parameters get to be billions and trillions of parameters. The traceability gets lost. The attack surface, if you look at most large banks, they're getting billions and billions of attacks, and many of them are going through the analog means. So it's using things like documents and papers and so forth that machines can't necessarily look at very easily. Structured data, much more easily to understand. The attack surface by which people are infiltrating is in these areas that machines haven't been really good at reading information. So most fraud today is still being, for instance, applied through forged checks, forged identity documents, things that, resubmitting information because you've got duplications in government services. So things are being resubmitted 5 or 6 times. Those are areas by which things can get into your systems and cause issues and bias and so forth. So there's the surface and everything is changing. But when you're using these systems, I think you've got to have borders. You've got to have traceability and transparency. I think actually our government agencies and services are actually quite good at this, building walls, understanding sovereignty of data, over time.
Just on the point around, public trust, transparency is the answer, and absolute transparency at that. So if you take the Scottish Government, for example, everywhere they're using AI, they've published it on their register, which is open to everyone, but it also needs to be inside the service. So if you are someone who is interacting with a particular service, you need to be telling people how you're using AI. So if, for example, you're going to be determining the outcome of their claim with AI, that needs to be expressed really clearly as part of that service. They can't find out later when they're going through an appeal process, because they will feel like they've been, they've not had all the information. So at every point, we need to be fully transparent. And if AI is only being used to assist someone's decision making, again, that needs to be really clear. Public trust will be eroded when those stories come out, where we haven't been clear, where we haven't been honest, and where when AI has been used behind the scenes. In terms of like increased attack surface, I think the way I think about this, and we wrote a blog on this a few months ago, is that it's a very different beast, and our traditional ways of securing technology don't apply to this new breed. It's conversational. So just like how we can't necessarily protect someone being socially engineered, we can't always protect these AI systems. It requires our cyber professionals, for example, to think differently about how they're securing the platforms. And it is possible. It just needs a different way of thinking. And I mentioned the models before, and as Andrew said, every single provider like his is working really hard to make sure the underlying platforms are secure as possible. But when we come to build, our own maybe custom solutions inside organizations, we need to be wrapping those systems in various different other techniques and tools to secure the platform, but also check things like reliability and confidence levels. And there's a whole bunch of techniques we need to be applying. So it's not a case of just throwing a model in and it will work. We have to kind of work pretty hard, just like we do with all technology, to make sure it's secure and safe.
Thank you. I'll take this question, James Lear. Given that data is so important to how AI can be deployed both effectively and safely, how does the siloed nature of most public sector organizations' data restrict their ability to make effective use of the technology?
Oh, what a good question. We thought about that deeply at Hyperscience. And so that's why we decided to go after the specialized model route rather than one generalized model being applied to solve virtually every task across, let's say, a horizontal spectrum. What we went at, because back office data is not well understood, sometimes it is unique, sometimes it is private. What we created was essentially an interface to allow you to teach essentially a foundational model, the language of your business in a trusted and secure way. So in as many as 15 to 20 documents with your assistance and training, you can teach it and you can wall off what you teach. You can see, what you put into the system. And so that's a way that we think, different organizations, they have different ways of expressing their data and handling and their own terminology. I think it could be somewhat of a frustrating experience to try to use a generalized all-purpose model to handle those unique friend situations. And so the world we live in today is to allow businesses to build their own sort of trusted way of teaching this companion technology, how they work and what that language is. We think that that's how this technology will roll out in a more scalable fashion over time deep inside these organizations where the language is rules-based, unique, the way that you work.
Shouldn't we be pushing public sector to be less siloed and to sort of work better across different so departments should be able to share their data with each other, or should we just say, well, this is how it is and we'll build a system that sort of is how it is now?
So I think actually AI is this part of the solution to this. So the reason why departments are siloed is because they have different technology, different data sets, different interfaces. It's really expensive and really time consuming to build the interfaces and the translation in order to bring that data together. With AI, we don't need to work as hard. We can ask questions over multiple discrete data sets and get the answer you need. So rather than having to spend a huge amount of time, which is what we have been doing for many, many years, trying to coalesce the data together into one place, we don't have to do that as much. So I think actually, I don't think it's much more of a issue as to how we can make AI work, but actually AI can help us reduce the silos between departments. So if, for example, if you want to ask a question about in the criminal justice sector, you need to cut across 4 or 5 different organizations. In this world I've just described, maybe you can ask one question and that question is then sent to using different AI agents to look across all that data set, bring it all together and give you an answer.
Okay.
Yeah, one of the interesting things in my previous career was, I had a call center technology. And one of the things I always thought was so interesting because there was nothing to examine was silence time. And I thought that was such an interesting thing because we were all building tools to understand voice and to understand what the interaction with an agent was. But actually, silence time told you something pretty profound. And it was that the individual was typically trying to service the customer, but having to go in multiple applications to try to find and solve the task. And so silence time was an indicator of potentially trying to go across silos to find that information. And I think, as Jay just said, that's quite complicated to join systems when companies come together and information is essentially spread around. I think that silence time will drop over time because I think we'll have an interface conversational layer that can go and access it and join the information for you much more quickly. And I think that's an example of how quickly government services can essentially get more efficient and effective because we're not having to continue to replumb all these systems that by nature, the vendors themselves don't want to talk to each other. And so they build their systems almost as if they don't want to be communicative with each other. And so I think that will change, over time.
Yeah, good point. I think I'm going to squeeze in one more question that we have in the Q&A bit before we sort of start to wrap things up. So This one is a question from Nico Kaplan, and he says, one thing I've noticed when piloting new AI tools is that it makes people more efficient. However, sometimes these time savings aren't reinvested appropriately. Take an example from the employability sector. If someone saves 10 minutes creating a new CV for a service user, the meeting ends rather than establishing more rapport. How do we approach this topic and reduce it, this productivity paradox? So how do we ensure that,
What a good
we're
question.
more efficient, and then what?
Does
How
that
do
mean
we
we get more time at the water cooler, or do we just go and find
uh,
coffee? And it's a profound question. And I think the difference, Nika, the way I think about that is that's been the existing paradigm that CIOs and businesses, as they've gone on this efficiency paradigm, right? You think about much labor as an example, the first step was to lift and shift the labor to lower cost locations, right? So you fragment up, you certain tasks, and you have lower cost labor in potentially different regions. That wasn't a great technique for public sector because most of the things have to be fulfilled within the region. But once you start down that journey of looking for productivity and efficiency, the first step was lift and shift with low cost labor. The next step was take that low cost labor, let's apply lean techniques, Six Sigma techniques to make it as effective and efficient as possible. Okay, now let's give them tooling. Let's give them RPA bots. Let's give them other tools to make it efficient. Essentially, we've reached a horizon where it's getting harder and harder to be more optimized. Those strategies across most businesses that management consulting has feasted on don't work. I think what's going to happen is AI isn't that, it's not that optimization. It's actually a fundamental transformation. That task, that role no longer needs to happen. And so I think the savings will come in much bigger chunks as you draw a circle around it. And so I think that's what I would advocate, is not to think about this as just another journey on that efficiency frontier, that we're going to draw a circle around the process, and it's going to be much more profound value-based change.
Interesting. Jay,
I would
anything to add?
I would hazard a guess that that example was tech-led. That someone's come up with a great solution, they've put it in, but as Andrew said, the entire process hasn't been thought about, hasn't been reimagined. So, we've put the tech in, but no one's actually thought about what happens now. Like, what do we do with this as a result? How has it actually changed the organization? How has it changed the experience? Which is why we need to look at it fully end to end at every point and have a fully well-rounded team looking at the consequence of making that intervention. We need to be looking at designers, at ops people, the frontline users, the technologists as well, to make sure that whatever intervention we make, whether it's a AI tool in this example, we're looking at the full thing and making sure that if there are some productivity gains as a result, we are making sensible choices about what to do with it.
I'm telling you, that's why I love Jay. His aperture, that's right. If I were to give, you have to take the lens that he's applying to the world. And I think that's what's going to make successful organizations, successful change, successful adoption, is exactly how he just articulated the wide range by which of considerations that you should take into account.
Yeah, no, I think both of you had really excellent examples, because it is sort of, it's transformational really at its heart, and sort of, so it's not just looking at the 10 minutes, but looking at the whole process and the whole, what we're doing and why, and sort of reimagining and starting from a blank sheet of paper in some ways, I guess. We're sort of at the end of our time now. I'll just give Andrew and Jay just the final 1 minute last thoughts that you have, that you want to leave us with about AI and the future of work.
Well, I think I cited my example just a minute ago, which is why I'm grateful to Jay and the way he's looking at the world. If I were to leave a thought, it is to think about that this is a transformational technology, not an optimization type technology. And that I would prioritize training, I would prioritize input and learning, because I think it requires new frameworks that we go forward, and that hasn't been something that we've been trained on or thinking about for the past 20 years. So grateful to have the audience and the time to be able to share some of those thoughts of what we're all working on, and really enjoy my time with both you, Heather, and Jay. So thank you for having me.
Jay, any final thoughts you want to leave us with?
I agree with all of that. I'd only add, transparency is key in everything we do in public sector. That's going to make or break this, and that's not just transparency to the citizen and the service user, that's transparency internally. We need to be making sure we're really clear, really specific about what we're doing. That's how we bring people on this journey. That's how we don't put people off, and people kind of refuse to be part of this journey we're on. So yeah, transparency would be my number one.
Great. Thank you so much for this really fantastic conversation. I've enjoyed it. I've learned a lot, and always enjoyed sort of having these conversations and engaging with the technology and seeing how it can benefit all of public service delivery. So thank you so much, Andrew and Jay, and thanks everyone that attended and participated in the chat. And we will see you at another Tech UK event another time. Thanks.
Thank you all.
Cheers.